tension building phase, makeup phase, and then you have this calm phase of the abuser acting like, again, nothing ever happened. The physical abuse may not be taking place, so there's maybe a gap in time. So maybe there's a day or so that goes by where everything is calm and it seems like things have been resolved. Promises made during makeup actually may be met. There may be gifts. There may be flowers, right? There may be trips that are taken as an effort to apologize and kind of create the calming effect to make the person again feel safe, right? That's always the goal. The goal in this kind of cycle, especially in that calming phase, is to maintain control after having lost control, right? It's trying to regain that sense of control. Judy, I know that you may have some things to share with those who are listening about this control factor. Can you speak to that at all?
I think it's really important to understand that domestic violence, it has nothing to do with love. It has everything to do with power and control. And unfortunately, you know, when Crystal was talking about that honeymoon phase, they're thinking, oh, I love you, I love you. There is no love about this. It's all about power and control. And the perpetrators need to take control over everything. And unfortunately, when Crystal was talking about that tension phase may last for years. And during that time, the erosion of the victim's self-esteem has happened. And usually the perpetrators also have separated the victim from their support systems, whether it's their family and friends. And so they're out there by themselves. So usually the victim has nobody else to talk to. They may talk to somebody at work, but you know, at work, people don't want to talk about this. It gets a little scary about that, you know, talking about it at work. So, you know, and I think it's really important, you know, there's such a thing as what we call the power and control wheel. You know, it looks like this, and you can obtain a copy of it from the National Center of Domestic and Sexual Violence. And you know, violence can come in various fashions. It can come in coercion and threats. Oftentimes, the perpetrator will use the children against the, you know, the victim. There's intimidation, making them afraid that they're going to lose everything, that there's going to be nothing left for them, whatever. Emotional abuse, putting her down constantly. That's where the erosion of the self-esteem happens. Again, the isolation from family and friends and any type of support system. Even if they go to church together, the victim's not usually allowed to talk to anybody. They're in and out kind of thing. Blaming constantly, using the children. Economic abuse, where I've seen where even if the woman is, or the victim is working, that paycheck is not theirs. It goes to the perpetrator. And then unfortunately, also male privilege. There is rape in marriages, and this is one of the factors of domestic violence as well.
I want to jump in right quick because some people are just now tuning in on Facebook Live. We were having some major technical difficulties, but we are now on Facebook in addition to Zoom. So if you're just tuning in, we are talking about domestic violence. My guest this evening, we have Dr. Crystal Jackson. She's one of our regulars for our mental health check-ins. And also our guest today is Dr. Judy Jacobs, who's a clinical therapist and registered nurse. And they're already about midway through talking about some of the warning signs and what is domestic violence. And I know some of the people are in Zoom going, we already heard this just a minute ago, but can you give us like maybe a few seconds of telling what domestic violence is, just for people who are just now tuning in on Facebook? Is that okay?
Yes, domestic violence is a crime. It's a crime here in Michigan. We do have laws against domestic violence. It's the willful intimidation, physical assault, battery, sexual assault, and or other abusive behavior as part of a systemic pattern of power and control perpetrated by one intimate partner against another. And now we look at domestic violence, it's called intimate partner violence. So, and unfortunately, 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men in the United States have experienced some form of physical violence by an intimate partner. And I think oftentimes people think about women being the only victim of domestic violence because, they're smaller or they don't have as much money or whatever, but men can also be victims of domestic violence as well.
Mhm.
And were we talking about some of the warning signs? Did we already cover that? What is there like a first warning sign that something is a problem here?
Right. We did mention some of that a moment ago, but just for those who are maybe joining in or able to view this segment here, is that we were talking about the cycle of abuse, and those who are listening, being able to be self-reflective and knowing what it looks like. I think is always really important, so that you can gauge and judge what type of partner you are, what role you have in your current relationship with your partner. I think it can be really helpful. We were talking about this idea of it being a cycle that starts with like this tension building phase that can last. There's no time limit. It's not like we're talking about day one there's tension building, or day two is making up phase, and day three is the calm phase. These can last an unknown length of time, each of these phases, but I think it's important to know the phases. And so the tension building phase is really just talking about the idea that there is some disagreement, that there is some communication or misunderstanding, or breakdown rather in communication. There is anger. The abuse actually starts in that tension building phase. There is this desire for, or need actually, that the victim has to, they kind of place this responsibility on themselves to keep the abuser calm. So if you find that you're always in the position of trying to calm down your spouse or your partner, or that you're the one who is always in the position of, like, you feel like you're walking on eggshells from day to day, that's that tension building phase. And then again, that can last for any length of time. You may find that you are being, separated from family, from friends, you're being isolated, you're being questioned about where you're going, or you notice that you can't go anywhere unless your partner was with you. So there is a lack of trust that's being exuded and being demonstrated in the relationship. This element of control. And then you get to this point of this makeup phase. So it's like after the storm is hit, now you have this repeated apology that comes up. Maybe you have a trip that the person takes you on, you're giving gifts, you're being made promises that it'll never happen again, and or you're being blamed for the abuse that you just recently experienced, or that you have been experiencing, and that it's your fault. And if you only did this, or if you had not done this, then I would fill in the blank, right? So there's a lot of if-then statements that are being made. Which is then eventually followed by this calm. So the calm phase, again, can be any length of time. And it's this calm phase where the abuser, makes it out, kind of comes across as if they're keeping their word. Oh, it hasn't happened in a month, or he's doing really good. It has been 2 months now, and it hasn't happened in a long time. And, so you begin to buy into that calm phase as well. Which then reinforces your belief that it's safe now to stay, despite what your experience has shown you. The physical abuse is probably not taking place during this time. Promises are being met and kept. And the abuser, again, is kind of gift giving. So they're making nice, if that's a good way to say it. They're making nice. They're making you feel comfortable again. But again, it still goes back to being in control, right? It's trying to regain the control that they completely lost at the tension building phase.
You absolutely broke down everything. So many people, I guess they're going, oh my goodness, that's me. Does this always mean there's no resolution to what's going on? Because many people fall into that category. Everything that you mentioned, is there recovery, or is it always a dead end?
Well,
Go ahead, Dr. Jacobs.
I mean, do people just throw in the towel right off because it's like, wow, that's me. He does this. He apologizes. We make up. He blames me. He is holding the money. He is everything that you just named.
Well,
What does that mean?
unfortunately, by the time it gets to that point, the woman, if it's the female, they've lost, they have no self-esteem left. And so they don't believe that they have any power to be able to make decisions or will be able to do anything. And they have been bad-mouthed and belittled for so long that that's what they believe that is their moniker in life. And unfortunately, oftentimes domestic violence ends in death for the victim. And, I've got a statistic here that says that 65% of all murder suicides involve an intimate partner, with 96% of the victims of these crimes are female. And the number one reason why women get killed in the workplace is because of domestic violence.
I heard you say that, Dr. Jacobs. Say that again. The number one reason women are killed.
Well, homicide is the number one reason women find death in the workplace, and it's because of domestic violence. What happens is if they have left the domicile and found shelter someplace, they probably haven't quit their job because they need their job to be able to take care of their kids. And so the disaffected lover, that's the only place they can find the person. And so they will go back to the workplace, and it's a very serious situation.
So what do we say? Let me throw in a question here, because I know I've read statistics say increase in domestic violence since the pandemic. So if this is all brand new to some couples, what do you say to them where maybe the stages have not progressed as far as some of the things that you've listed? What do they do if they get some triggers?
Well, let's look at some of the reasons why it has increased during COVID. Is because of everybody staying at home and they're not being able to get out and talk with family and friends or go out and do any social activities. And so there's several reasons. Number one, they're stuck at home and even if they weren't in an abusive situation before, the stress has been so tremendous for almost everybody that it has just aggravated the situation. Oftentimes women and many men have lost their jobs as well. Women primarily because they've been in positions where those jobs were deceased, or like they were waitresses or in other types of employment, or they had to quit their jobs because they had their kids at home and they had to take care of their children and they had nobody to watch them, so they had to quit their jobs. The other thing is that in the very beginning of this pandemic, the prisons were releasing prisoners. And also they were limiting pretrial incarcerations, which meant if anybody had been arrested or already had violent tendencies, they were let out of prisons and being sent back home. So now we've got those persons back in that mix. The other piece too is that the shelters weren't open. And also many of our domestic violence shelters in our communities, they get a little bit of money from the government, but most of it is about gift giving and raising monies through, fundraising, and none of that happened. So they didn't have the funds to be able to help people either. So we've got, situations where people had some outlets, whether it's church or bowling or going to the movies or going to the restaurants or whatever, none of that happened. And so everybody just was stuck in the house.
And I think if I can add this too, I think that even in situations, let's say there's someone listening and to this, and they have found themselves in a situation where, yes, the tension in the home has built, right? It has increased. Maybe there was no pre-existing violence in the home, but because of the pandemic, they have started to notice that there has been a shift in the dynamic in the home. They're noticing that there is increased anger and frustration. There's maybe additional yelling. Maybe it hasn't become physical yet, right? I think that paying attention to those signs would be a good reason to reach out to a mental health clinician or therapist, or even a clergy member if they are in the church, or someone that they trust to get assistance and get help before it goes too far, right, to this violent type of interaction, and dynamic within the home, where now you have a safety issue that wasn't previously a safety issue, right? And especially whether kids are in the home or not, it doesn't matter. It's something that I think people can look at and be aware of what the red flags are and when to reach for help. I would say that it's so incredibly important to not wait until it becomes physically violent, right? Get the help right away. And with regards to the pandemic, I feel like there may be even questions about, well, we were told we can't leave our home. Well, if it has become physically violent, I would say that in those situations, if you're able to leave, right, a situation where your life is at risk every single day, I think it's worth considering, if it hasn't gone too far, if you haven't been isolated yet from your family, that it may be well worth you trying to make that transition into a safer environment, so as to avoid things escalating to the point of like no return, or someone being seriously injured up to killed, right? In that type of environment.
Is it safe or not safe, if you haven't reached the level where it's physical, to talk to your partner about what's going on and your concerns, or is that digging a bigger hole?
Well, the only time anybody's going to talk to, if the victim is talking to the partner, they usually have a healthy self-esteem and can have this conversation without getting into conflict. So if they have those skill sets, great. It would be helpful because, obviously interpersonal relationship skills are necessary, and all of this has turned upside down all of our interpersonal relationship skills. So we need new coping strategies. So being able to talk to your partner and say, hey, this is happening. I know that this is very stressful. I've lost my job. Things are a little crazy right now. The other thing I want to just make a mention too is that many people have not gotten physical assistance with doctors. They've not gone to the doctors and taken care of their medical needs. And so many of these medical diagnoses could cause somebody to act out as well. So, and if that's not being addressed at the point, so all of these things play a fact. But if you're going to try to get a therapist, I think it's really important to, first of all, contact your insurance company to see where, they can refer you to therapists. Make sure they have, a background in domestic violence or trauma. The other thing is that if you don't have insurance that covers it, their community mental health, Easter Seals can help you out as well.
Absolutely. And with that conversation, Gail, that we're talking about, like if you're still in that situation and you want to attempt to have a conversation with your partner, you're not at the point of it becoming violent, and it's not, haven't reached this level of, safety is at risk. Some of the things that can be, we talked about the signs and what it looks like when you're wrapped up and kind of caught up in a domestic violence situation. Well, some of the things to look for that gives you the idea that there is hope, right? So what does that look like when there is hope? How do I know where I am? Where do I fall in my relationship with my partner? You're looking for equality, right? So the wheel that Dr. Jacobs showed and kind of held up earlier talks about this wheel of control, right? Which is like a warning sign. On the other side of that is this wheel of equality, okay? And so this wheel of equality is something that people can also look for as signs and symptoms that things are moving. Even if there has been some concern, it's moving in the right direction. And I don't know if, I'm sorry, my camera went off.
Okay, I was gonna tell you.
I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if people can see this here, but there is a wheel that deals with equality. And again, same location, you can look this up, is a nonviolent way of communicating with your partner and trying to establish equality. So what does that look like? It's going to look like negotiation, right? And if you're finding it hard to negotiate, then maybe there is some outside support or guidance that would be helpful to your relationship. You're looking for non-threatening behavior. So you're talking and acting in a way that is making your partner feel comfortable. You're respecting each other. You're listening to each other. You're trusting and supporting. So I mentioned earlier about, this phase of this cycle of abuse where it may look and appear as if there's tension building and there's this isolation. Well, the trust, if it's an equality, a non-violent setting that you're in, you're going to have that trust. So your partner's going to trust you to go and talk to maybe an individual therapist and not feel threatened by your conversation with another professional. You're going to be noticing that the person is being accountable for their behavior. So not just a mere apology, but an acknowledgement, right, of maybe their loud voice or their loud tone, right? So again, we're talking about nonviolent situations. So knowing what a healthy relationship looks like is just as important as knowing as what an unhealthy, controlling relationship looks like as well. So even when it comes to finances, maybe there is one partner who's working and the other one is at home with the children. And in that situation, the one who's not working is not feeling as if they owe their spouse or their partner something, right? When you get the feeling that you owe something, that's a good sign that there's no equality there, that is lacking in equality when it comes to economic partnership. Maybe that you feeling devalued in your role because you're not working. So those are all signs of, a healthy relationship when you are feeling valued, appreciated. You're being that type of attitude is being demonstrated to you on a regular basis. So those are the signs of hope that you're looking for to let you know, Gail. Kind of a long answer to your question, but that's what you're looking for to know that yes, there is still hope there.
I'm trying to keep my memory on some. I have three things I want to touch on, and we're going to talk about something else. I want to talk about when the male is the victim. Can we talk about that a little more? Because sometimes that's a different comfort level with even acknowledging that type of abuse. I also want to talk about child abuse. That's another thing in the home. And then I want to talk about maybe teenagers or people who it may not be considered domestic, but violence and abuse in a relationship before the fact. When should they get out? Or, some
I wanted to bring that up because
any one of those three.
When we talk about domestic violence, it usually people think about married couples. That's not what intimate partner violence. It can start when you're in high school. I've given these talks to high school kids, and many kids are involved in domestic violence where the power and control situation. Also, it doesn't matter your age, your race, your ethnicity, your gender orientation. This takes place in all those categories. So when we're talking about male victims of domestic violence, we don't hear about it very often because it's usually not reported. We may see it in the workplace. I've seen it where somebody's gotten into the workplace and gone over and clobbered somebody over the head with a stapler and caused a scene and things. And unfortunately, there's really nowhere for the male victim to go unless they get private therapy, where not like a shelter or anything. So we're not equal in terms of the community resources for male victims of domestic violence. So they're sort of almost like on their own, but they can be abused, they can be stalked. It is just as devastating to them. And in many cases more so than the women, because there's no place for them to go. When we talk about children, the problem is that 1 in 15 children in the United States are exposed to intimate partner violence, for more than a total of 5 million children in our country. And witnessing intimate partner violence is associated with other forms of violence. 1 in 3 children who witness domestic violence are also victims of child abuse. We also know that children who witness intimate partner violence growing up are 3 times as likely as their peers to engage in violent behaviors. We also know that if they're raised in abusive homes, they learn that violence is an appropriate way to solve conflict. So unfortunately, they also may end up abusing their own partners as they've gotten older. So,
I do
it's a
have,
form of childhood trauma
yeah.
for them. And, unless we can, and it's a greater risk of serious adult health problems, including obesity, cancer, heart disease, depression, substance abuse. It's
Yeah,
it's
it's a
a
cycle. It's something that
it's
really
a
needs to be
it's a
concerned.
major cycle.
There was a question. Will you please provide the names of providers for counseling for people without insurance? I think, Dr. Jacobs, you mentioned some in general. I guess they can probably call to see if they can
Every
treat you
county
without.
has a community mental health
Yes.
services, and also Easter seals.
Okay, and you can also check with the Novi Public Library or whatever your area library is to see what resources are available that they can assist you with as well, if that's an option. But
Yes.
if you have computer access, I guess you do if you're on with us now, you can Google, what did you say, domestic violence or for your county?
The community mental health facilities for therapy, but you also can Google domestic violence shelters.
Domestic
And
violence shelters.
And there are some in most counties in our state.
Okay, I hope that helps.
Mm-hmm.
All right, what else we're going to talk about with violence? We got that late start because of the technical problems, but I do want to tie it in. We were talking about violence and how it increased during the pandemic. As we segue into talking about the pandemic itself and some of the stressors related to that, depression, still isolation, fear. Let's move into that. And if you do have questions, if it's still about relationships and domestic violence, please don't hesitate to put the questions in the chat or comment section. This is an open platform. And if it's even on another subject, if you just have a question, we have some professionals here that are providing their time to you to check in. Please feel free to do that as well. But as we talk about things that are going on during the pandemic, wow, everything's just all over the place in terms of causing stress. What can we say about people who are depressed and not getting any better because of what's going on?
You know what, Gail, I'm going to try to tie that question into the domestic violence piece, because what comes to mind for me is people understanding their basic personal rights. Their basic personal rights. So some of your basic personal rights are the right to say no. Right? So if there are situations that are going on in your life and it makes you uncomfortable, you don't feel safe, you have a right to say no. You don't have to feel like you have to appease anyone. Now, understanding that some of these personal rights are easier to be enforced when the person has the confidence to do it. Right? So if you're dealing with low self-esteem, or you're dealing with, identity issues and things of that sort with your self-concept, then that may be something that can be addressed with the mental health professional to help you to get to that point of understanding and being able to advocate for your own basic personal rights. So the right to say no, the right to change your mind about something. You can change your mind. You may say, okay, I want this or I don't want this. And then you think about it, you contemplate, you consider, and you say, you know what? I changed my mind. This is not what I want. You have a right to say that without consequence. You have a right to make a mistake. So when we talk about domestic violent, environments and households and relationships, even if you're not living together, when you're made to feel as if your mistake is your minor mistake, and no matter what type of mistake it was, your mistake is now the cause and the reason why you are now being abused, not okay. It violates your basic personal right to make a mistake, right? And so sometimes you'll hear people say, when they're explaining almost the abuse that they are experiencing, they'll say, well, I know how this person is, and so I know this person does not like it when I do fill in the blank. Had I just done fill in the blank, then this would have never happened. This person would have never gotten upset. I know better. We've been together for this length of time. And so they almost find themselves like making excuses for the person who is abusing them. They're almost like protecting the abuser, justifying their behavior. You also have a right to be in a non-abusive environment, and you have a right to be in a non-abusive relationship. And so sometimes these concepts, they can come across as really basic and easy, right? That's the title, what I'm referring to them as, basic personal rights. But again, if you're already questioning yourself and questioning your decisions and questioning your value and your worth, and because either one of what has happened to you, what has been said to you, then again, these are all signs and symptoms that maybe there is someone else, a professional who is licensed to provide clinical therapy services, and a person who specializes in domestic violence and trauma, as Dr. Jacobs mentioned earlier. These are all signs that if you don't feel like you have these rights, that may be a reason for you to reach out and seek some assistance with this area in particular. And I think it ties into, in general, in life in general, especially now during the pandemic, there are times when we feel judged based on our decisions during the pandemic, right? So some people are they're ready to go out. They'll go to a restaurant and they'll enjoy themselves. Restaurants are open. And then there's another person who says, I don't really know if I want to go out. I don't feel really safe right now. Or there's a birthday party and, right, people are trying to convince you to do different things. You have a right to say no. You have a right to change your mind. You have a right to make your own decisions. And so I think those things are important, even if we're talking about violent relationships.
Of course,
I would like to bring up another part of another extension of what she was talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Most of my patients who have been victims of domestic violence don't want to leave, or they refuse to leave the situation. And the bottom line is they're afraid to be alone. And what has happened during this pandemic, this isolation, that all of us have been separated from our loved ones and our families. And this isolation has been extremely difficult because there's been no connection. And we as human beings need to be connected to others, to have life purpose, and to just feel like we belong somewhere. And so oftentimes victims of domestic violence will not leave that abusive situation because they believe that they belong there. They, somewhere along the line, they believe that this abuse is actually love, and they don't want to be alone. So part of therapy is, okay, so if you're not going to leave, what can you do to help build up your own self-esteem? How can you figure out to reach out to other people, or to belong to some church or whatever group you can belong to? Connecting through Zoom like we're doing right now is a great way of connecting with other people. Before I found this, I was really isolated, but I think Zoom and Google Duo and all those types of things have been lifesavers for many people. But just, recognizing that you're not alone. You're not alone. There's people out there that can help you and can help you stay in the situation, help you to develop different coping strategies, or help you to leave and move on to a different pathway.
Another thing I find that's common is about the children. I know, Dr. Jacobs, you did say something about children, but what do you say to your kids who could be witnessing the abuse in the home, various age ranges? Do you say something to them? Because if they see it, then what?
Well, the problem is there's already being something said to them, usually by the perpetrator.
Mm-hmm.
And so the perpetrator's usually telling them that she or he deserves it, that they were bad, and unfortunately, oftentimes the children themselves are being abused. But that is also the number one reason why women do leave the perpetrator, is if the children are starting to be abused. But again, where do they go? If they've got children, especially boys that are over the age of 13, shelters won't take them. there aren't shelters right now. I mean, very few of them are open right now. So, the opportunities for getting out and getting assistance can be difficult sometimes.
So calling those hotline numbers, just in case you're thinking, I don't know what to do still, calling those hotline numbers, calling those help numbers through the county or through your state or through there are.
First of all, it's connecting. It's connecting. They will give you information, they will support you, and they will also give you references or resources in your area. So it's very important to reach out. Unfortunately, sometimes in very serious situations, phones have been taken away. People don't have ways of reaching out to other people.
And then I guess too, I would think you would not get caught seeking help. Do it in a private space. Isn't that recommended?
Well,
I watch too many TV shows. I mean, you don't let them catch you looking for help.
Well, doing it in a private space, if there are, if you're really looking to leave, there are some things that may help, if there's a camera, that can be used in the home. If there are different documents that you can begin to gather or make copies of on your own, if you are reaching out to someone for help, if you're making calls when your partner's at work, right? If there is a way for you to maybe leave out of the home and use a neighbor's phone, if you don't have your own phone, or if you feel like the phone calls are being monitored where you live, there's just so many scenarios that maybe even more that we could even talk about here tonight in this segment, that people are dealing with or have dealt with, or they know someone who's dealing with these things that are so extreme that we may not even touch on them because some things we just hadn't thought about, right? There are so many different scenarios that people could be in right now that we just may not know and may not address. But off the top of my head, some of the things to address that statement that was made is that if you're looking, to find safe ways to make phone calls, maybe if you're able to do that when the abuser is out of the home, or if they go away for a minute to the grocery store, and if you feel that you can slip away and use someone else's phone, that would be a good way to do it. I think it all depends on the severity of each person's situation that they're in. That would dictate, what route they choose, to go. Documentation of, past events, if there is a way that you can document these things, and keep them in a place that is not gone into by the abuser, is always good. Trying to reach out, trying to figure out ways to get cash. If you're a person who's not able to go to work, you don't have your own money, trying to find ways to gather funds within the home as much as possible. Again, these are just some ideas of how to keep yourself safe and also how to start the planning process of leaving the home. And especially with children, none of this would you share with a child, right? As far as the efforts to leave, you would not communicate that to the child. I think that would be something that would not be helpful, because now you're putting the child in a situation that is making them in the middle. It's kind of placing them in the middle, trying to keep a secret, right? Which is just not helpful for the child. So even in your efforts to do this and be safe and keep your children safe, I would say if you're leaving, I would say not to put the child in the middle of that, not to put the child in a situation where they're now having to keep a secret. And then what happens if it slips out, right? And the abuser finds out, and then now it's difficult, and it's made even that much more difficult for everyone involved.
Tell me this, what about people who say, I want to ask this, what about people who say, oh my goodness, we're not to that degree. It's not to the point where, I need to leave, they may not think, or it isn't so severe. Is there a such thing as severe domestic violence versus not severe, or that's just wishful thinking?
Well, I think it plays on a continuum of behaviors. It starts out with, the belittling behaviors, the slap, the punch, the throwing something up against the wall. And all of those, there can be interventions there to stop it. And so if we can get to that point, if we can intervene at that point and develop some new coping strategies, that would be really helpful. Unfortunately, we don't see it until it's ended up, in severe situations when the police are being called or they're being mandated to come to us for therapy or whatever. And a couple of things I just want to point out. Number one, if, this is one of the most serious calls for police officers as well, because this is oftentimes they'll be injured or killed in these situations too. Another point of view when Crystal was talking is don't tell the kids, but also, you don't want to tell your family members either, just because you don't want any of this information leaking, but you do want to tell your HR person at work, because if you are leaving the situation, you're increasing your chances greatly of being injured or killed. And normally or usually it could be at the workplace. And so the HR director at a workplace has the onus to increase safety and protective measures around you to protect you and the other coworkers so that nothing happens to you while you're at work.
Good point. Good point.
Yes, indeed. I think I said we were going to talk a little bit about overall pandemic stress. So let's kind of segue back into that a little bit more as well. Let's talk about people who are still, and we only have a few more minutes, people who are still in fear of the pandemic and fear of the vaccine. Everyone, they all have their own opinions of whether or not they want to take the vaccine. And I leave that's all left up to the individual. But what do you say if it's all stemmed from fear?
Well, I think this has been a really, this whole thing has been about, bottom line, it's been about fear. Everything has been about fear. So I think it's, number one, it's very helpful to talk to professionals, start talking with your family doctor about the vaccine. Is this helpful? Let them give you the scientific background research information, depending on what your physical status is at the time. The other thing is about connecting with other people and trying to stay on a positive strategy, I think. I know that, I work with a Bible study group, and, we're constantly talking about ways of coping through all of this, connecting with other people, even if you can't see them in person. So coping strategies, finding new hobbies, getting outside, doing something what I call nature bathing, walking in nature, checking out, listening for the birds, doing those kinds of things that bring joy to your heart helps to decrease the stress for everybody.
Before we go away, I do have a question. I want to address it. It's pretty serious for someone who has a teenager who's very, very depressed. They're currently getting some counseling over the last couple of months. They're talking about leaving home. They're uncomfortable at home. They plan to move out soon. They want depression medicine. Speak to them. If you're talking to someone and it's really serious, what can you tell them immediately? What can the parent do? Because I don't know if the teenager is listening.
Well, the child wants to leave home. The child wants to leave home, but they're not leaving home secretively, because you're saying that the parent is aware.
Yes, it looks like that.
Of this idea that the child wants to leave home. So I would recommend, one, if they're looking for medication, take them to their nearest, or the family doctor, pediatrician, right? Because you want them to speak with someone about that particular condition, which is what you're saying is depression. So speak with a medical professional about the condition. Also speak with a mental health professional about the depression. Those would be my first two statements to the parent involved. Children, and if the child wants to leave, it's an indication that something's not right in the home. So or at least if if it's not the case that something's not right, at least that's the perception clearly of the teenager who's in the home.
A little
And
more information on that. I'm sorry, they're 18 years old at home without moving to college. So maybe it looks like they were a college student who was possibly supposed to live on campus, if that helps with your answer, Dr. Jackson.
Okay, so if the person is 18, they can, I was going to say if the person, but even if the person, my answer is still the same. I think it's additional information in case there is a younger person under the age of 18. If a child at home wants to leave home and they're seeking, there's a mental health condition, at least the parent believes that it is, the child, I believe in the state of Michigan, at the age of 14, they can go and seek medical treatment without their guardian, without their parent. And that is the case in our state. And so that child, even if they are under 18, but especially if they're 18, they can go and seek, assistance wherever. But many people don't realize that you can still receive the medical treatment and assistance that you need, even if you're under the age of 18. So I would say that directing them in the hands of a professional, sometimes, parents, we can try our best. But if our children are not or sometimes our children just make their own independent decision for different reasons to do what they want to do, and maybe there is not the best relationship right now for whatever reason. I think that in those situations, what we are best able to do in situations where we can't control necessarily what decisions our children make is equipping them with everything we could possibly, give them as they're contemplating that type of decision. If they want to leave the home, then we can provide them with the resources, phone numbers, contacts, right? Places so they're not leaving empty-handed. If we can't convince our children to stay in the home, or we believe it's safe, and the child, for whatever reason, feels like it's unsafe, then that's our best recourse, especially if they're over the age of 18.
He has a bad relationship with his father.
You provide them with.
I'm reading as it comes to me. I'm sorry. He has a bad relationship with his father.
So if you're in a bad relationship with the father and you're unable to resolve it, if there's no resolve, we don't know if the father is open to resolution. There's so many questions involved. There's so many questions of the therapist that I have right away. There's so much, right, that we can't really get into right now. But if we just take the idea that there's conflict with one of the parents, the 18-year-old wants to leave. Let's say there is no willingness on either both parties in to resolve the issue or work together or engage in family therapy. Maybe they've tried that several times over. They feel like it's failed. I say your best course of action is to equip your child with as much information and as much resource as you possibly can. And I would start with your primary care physician, and I would start with a mental health physician. Absolutely.
Okay. Anything else you want to add on that one, Dr. Jacobs? No.
Unfortunately, we're seeing an increase in suicides amongst our teenagers during this pandemic. So I stress what Crystal had to say too, is that they have got to get to a family physician. They can get into therapy, but also if he's already been admitted to a university or college, and I think that's one of the major issues that's going on with our teenagers right now. They were so looking forward to moving on with their lives and in college, and all of a sudden they're stuck at home on online courses and that type of thing. But these colleges do offer mental health services as well as part of your tuition, so that might be an opportunity as well. If not, then get to some sort of mental health facility in your area, if whatever your insurance will pay for it. But I do know that most universities have counseling services available even for online students.
Yes.
We're all doing telehealth right now, so it's not like you have to go anywhere, but you can reach out, you can see the therapist, like how you can see us right now, and it's working well doing that. So definitely reach out, because we don't want.
For sure. And the person is concerned about suicidal thoughts. So reach out right away. Don't waste.
And if it gets really bad, then get them to an emergency room. Don't mess with this. Just go to an emergency room.
Yes.
Because and be very, very, impress the physicians and the doctors that they are having suicidal ideations. They may or may not have done anything, but that so they can get at least assessed by a mental health professional in the emergency room.
And use that computer. I know we're tired of being on the computer all the time, but there's so many resources you can find when you Google for state and local and county assistance for abuse or violence or teen abuse, anything that you're expressing that you're concerned about. Google it. They will give you a contact, a phone number. If that's not the right contact, ask them for a resource that will assist and explain to them what the situation is. There's always help out there for you. So just don't give up and just let it go.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Community mental health facilities are your best, I would say your best first step, because that is what they're there for.
Very good. We're going to talk some more. We're out of time, aren't we? We passed our time a little bit. We want to say a little bit more in encouragement for people dealing with any kind of mental stress. I always relate it to the pandemic just because that's what we're in right now. Seems like everything has been amplified with whatever we're dealing with, but a little motivation for people is always good. Let's start with Dr. Jacobs first, and then I'll end with you, Dr. Jackson. Is that okay?
I think it's really important to remember that we're not alone in all of this. Even though we feel alone, we're stuck in our houses or whatever, but there's ways of connecting, either by the phone, Zoom, Google Duo, whatever. It's really important. There are other coping strategies that we can put into place: exercise, nature bathing, just being aware of the positives in your life. Turn off the TV. Don't listen to the news more than 5 minutes a day. That's what I tell all my patients, because you'll get it in 5 minutes. That's all you need to know.
Okay. Okay.
I mean, it's about really intentionally looking for the good.
Okay. That's a chore in and of itself, isn't it?
Well,
Yeah.
you know what? Sometimes we can intentionally, decide we're going to sit on the couch with, a family member or whoever and watch a funny movie with a bowl of popcorn. That's an intentional setting a good situation up. We have to do that. We just can't let everything just go fly. Life is flying by us. I mean, we've been in this for 15 months now. It seems like longer, but if you think about it, it flew by. And spring is coming. The trees are budding and blooming. The squirrels are eating up all of our bird seed. I mean,
I missed that too, though, And then they mentioned, did you hear them mention snow?
Yes, don't mention
right
that,
down
please.
again, didn't they?
I know.
What?
We're supposed to, I just covered up all my flowers with flower pots tonight because we're supposed to get 2 to 4 inches of snow tomorrow.
We're in denial of that.
No, I'm sorry. But the thing is, this will be the last one.
So they say.
Yeah, so they say. Well, that's what I'm planning on.
I also want to mention to that parent, before I get to you, Dr. Jackson, there will be a Talking Teen Stress program April 27th in the same platform at 6:30 p.m. That's devoted the entire hour on talking about stress for teens. I'm not suggesting that you wait to address your personal issue, but if you would like to listen in or even participate in the conversation, you can do so. That is April 27th. It's a Tuesday evening at 6:30 p.m. You can go to novilibrary.org and register for the program, or you can email me, ganderson@novilibrary.org, if you'd like more information. Let's go on with you, Dr. Jackson. It's supposed to be closing
You know what? I want to give you the suicide hotline too, because I think that's important. It's the National Suicide Prevention Hotline. It's 1-800-273-8255. Again,
number again.
Suicide hotline is 800-273-8255. And you can call that any time of the day or night.
If you missed that number and wasn't prepared, we are being recorded on Facebook. So you can go to Novi Public Library's Facebook page and scroll down to get that number again. Or once again, you can email me and I can give you the number if you missed it.
It's wonderful that that number and the community mental health numbers for various counties are all 24-hour access centers. They may have different names, but that's exactly what they are. They're access centers. They have crisis lines. Each county has a 24-hour access center, so you can call them any time of any day, and they are always available. So there is hope. There is help that is out
Yes,
there for
yes.
people. Gail, I was going to end on the note with the upcoming series, mental health series, dealing with teenagers. So I'm glad that that was put out there. One of the things that people can look forward to with Novi Public Library is this ongoing series of mental health check-ins. And so sometimes we feel like either we don't have the time to really sit for our own individual therapy session, or we don't have the insurance, so we don't have a means or a way to go about doing it. Maybe we're not even just comfortable yet of taking that step. I think this platform is what I want to end with, is the fact that you can come here, you can receive valuable information, helpful information, you can present questions, and you can get answers. You can get access to resources and get some type of guidance and direction of what you can do next for your specific and particular situation. So that's the hope that I want to leave with people tonight.
Very good. Thank you, Dr. Jacobs and Dr. Jackson. I really appreciate once again having you join me in this session and time. Always beneficial, and I'm so grateful. For everyone out there, I always encourage you to hold on and keep the faith and stay encouraged. And we're all in something together that we're going to get through. So hold on to your faith and your hope. Thank you, and have a good evening, everyone.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.